and I'd say the best of the IPAs, whether it's a hazy, a West Coast Imperial, are the ones that create a beautiful harmony between the aromatic contributions of the hops and the actual taste and bitterness. Examples in any of those categories share a careful balance between aromatic hop contribution and taste hop contribution. It's more challenging to sit in a session and have 2, 3, 4 pints of hazy IPAs than, say, a classic West Coast IPA. There is a return to more excitement for West Coast IPA. Well, the one that's in market that I'm really excited about now, Doug, is the Colderest IPA.
Thank you everyone for watching. Your views make this interview possible, and hitting that subscribe button is also transformative to the channel. Oddly, 73% of you haven't done so yet. So if you found value in any of my videos, please hit that like and subscribe to fuel our growth, our clout, and attract even more great guests like Sam Calagione of Dogfish Head, Boston Beer. Sam, welcome, and thank you so much for joining.
It's great to be here with you today, Doug.
Well, I'm going to
like that sound. Good for you.
I want to have a nothing but the haze while we're talking, because at GABF, you and Jim Cook coaxed me into trying a nothing but the haze early one morning for breakfast, and I have learned to really love that, especially after exercise. So cheers, my friend, and thank you for the great beer. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is your culinary approach to brewing. It's absolutely fascinating to me how over the years you've challenged our palates with the 60, 90, and 120-minute IPAs, and that's about to come out soon, right? I was looking at your release calendar, and the 120 is about to come out soon, right?
Yeah, that's right. I know you've got a gourmet theme to your show, and so yeah, we've always approached the brewer's art through a gourmand's creative, filter. Meaning, we believe that as brewers at Dogfish, we should have as much creative latitude to choose ingredients to put into our beers as the world's finest chefs choose to put into their food, because after all, beer is just liquid food. So when we opened Dogfish Head, we had the distinction of being the smallest commercial brewery in the whole country in 1995. And we intentionally opened the brewery within a restaurant that had a big open kitchen, so customers could see us bringing culinary ingredients out of that kitchen in one direction on plates out to their table, cooked over wood-fired ovens and grills, and then taking similar culinary ingredients out of that same kitchen, maybe a 5-gallon bucket of maple syrup or pureed raisins or roasted chicory, and bringing them in the other direction in that building into the brewing system. So right from the get-go, we were using culinary ingredients in the majority of Dogfish Head beers. That was true 29 years ago when we opened, and it's still true today.
Well, you've made a career out of not complying with the German purity law, which, I think is really fun. So how would someone like you, who's really kind of anti-tradition, that may not be quite right, but you're very open to new things, how would you compare, let's start out kind of at the beginnings here, how would you compare just an IPA to a lager, and whether it can be purely defined on bitterness?
I would say, though, that, first of all, beauty is in the eye of the beer holder, and the best beers in the world, that's a subjective thing. Everyone's sensory, tools is different from each other. So there's no such thing as the best beer. There's tons of world-class beers out there, both lagers and ales. But I would say if we're going to objectively compare IPAs to lager, it has less to do with the filter being around hopping regiments or hopping levels as it does to do the fermentation process, because IPAs are members of the ale side of the beer family, and the other side is lagers. And the difference between the two is ales are, generally speaking, if you're going to use a wine comparison, they're more like red wines, and lagers are more like white wines, meaning ales ferment with ale yeast at warmer temperatures, and the way that red wines ferment at warmer temperatures. So it's a more vigorous, robust fermentation. It creates more esters, more big aromatics in a beer, whereas lagers ferment more like white wines. They ferment at colder temperatures, more subdued, more mellow, great nuances, but more subtle. So I would say the lagers are more distinct in the way that they're fermented than they are in the hops. You can have a very hoppy lager, like a dry hopped Italian Pilsner style lager, and that could have more hops than an English pale ale. But there is a very distinct, method of fermenting lagers compared to IPAs.
Well, I love your analogy to wine. I think that really is very enlightening because so many of us enjoy not only beer, but also great wines. But as we kind of look into the sub-styles, because IPAs, like lagers, but I think IPAs maybe have gotten this huge range of sub-styles from the New England IPAs. How would you differ and contrast, there's some differences in lagers, and compare and contrast those two?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's more the modern American craft brewing renaissance that has brought the distinction and breadth of different interpretations of IPAs into the sub-styles, whereas generally lagers, from 1400s, 1500s in Germany, Czech Republic, those styles and sub-styles under lager have been evolving for centuries. But in the world of IPAs, it started with English IPAs. They deserve the credit for coming up with the style. But early in the craft brewing renaissance, when Dogfish started doing 90-minute, for example, it's the first Imperial IPA. I think it was the first beer in America to have Imperial next to the word IPA on the label. We started distributing that beer in 1999. And back then, IPAs were not the most popular craft beer style in America. It was a very small component of the first generation of craft brewing. Flash forward to today, I believe it's like one in every two craft beers is produced in America is an iteration of an IPA. So the style has not only exploded but fragmented. And just in the 20-ish years that we've been brewing, 25-ish years that we've been brewing IPAs at Dogfish, we did, 90-minute was the first Imperial IPA. Now we see that beers like 60-minute, meaning beers that have clarity, they're filtered, and they have a nice hop bitterness to them and not a lot of sweetness. Those are now classified as West Coast IPAs. And then, as you mentioned, New England or Hazy IPAs is a very popular subset, as are Cold IPAs, which we do one called Colderest, which is pretty unique. We could talk about that too. Black IPAs had a moment there in the late 90s, and we still like making those occasionally in small batches. Fruited IPAs like our 61-minute, which is 60-minute plus one ingredient, which is Syrah grapes. So you can take that IPA platform, and as long as it's a top fermented ale yeast, you can take it in lots of different creative directions.
Well, and that's what I love about the variety, but you've, kind of gotten into some interesting areas. The Slightly Mighty is another one that I love. And, I like the emphasis on lower calories because, like nothing but the haze, I would love to have a beer early in the morning. And I'm just not like the Germans. I just can't have one with much alcohol early in the mornings. But especially after exercise, they're great. So tell me what you've kind of learned about calories and IPAs and how we can, as maybe some of us are wanting to get a little more health conscious, what we can kind of look for with better nutrition, but still have an IPA.
Yeah, so you're having a great non-alc from our sister brewery under Boston Beer is Sam Adams, and Jim Cook, and the team on the Sam Adams brand have been working to perfect that beer for almost half a decade, and it did win the gold medal a couple of years ago at the Great American Beer Fest. We're super proud of that. That's a 0.5, so it classifies as non-alc, but it goes through both a low-gravity fermentation and a dealcoholization process to make it taste like real beer. And then if you go up the spectrum, still kind of within the wellness space, but instead of sober, this is more just, for folks that are just don't want a lot of alcohol or they don't want a lot of calories or carbs. You mentioned the Dogfish had Slightly Mighty. And that was when we challenged ourselves about a decade ago and said, let's make the most flavorful true IPA, but let's do it at the exact same carb level as Michelob Ultra. So we did a lot of really creative work on that recipe, including using natural enzymes to further break down sugars into the beer to ferment it out, kind of maximize the alcohol, versus minimize the carbs. So we're really, really proud of that beer, and it is a subsection. We first marketed it as a low-cal IPA, but now we're marketing it as a light IPA because that style, that little segment is really starting to grow as younger drinkers are more into wellness cues and counting calories and carbs to a degree that no previous generation of beer drinkers focused on.
So for somebody who came out with the Imperial IPA, and then you got to 120 coming up this spring, which I always love to get those, you've had a lot of expertise in the higher alcohols. But what do you think the trends are? Because you've also done the lower alcohols like the Slightly Mighty, the Sequench, which is quite unique. What do you think the trends are? It sounds like at first it was more bitterness and lots of alcohol, and maybe there's a shift there. How would you sum up IPA trends that you think are going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got a lot going on at both ends of the spectrum, lower and high ABV. And 2 years ago, I would have said, and that the low ABV and the over 8 ABV trend, those two bifurcated spaces were where more growth was than the middle, call it 5 ABV to 8 ABV, the traditional IPA ABV space. But I would say, like, what we're seeing in trends in the last 6 months, and my friends at Other Half Brewery from New York were down here brewing with us last week, and our friends at Dewey Beer Company down the road from us, we were talking to them about it a month ago. And what we're really starting to see both at small tasting room breweries and in production, nationally or regionally distributed top 50 breweries, that there is a return to more excitement for West Coast IPAs, meaning people still love hazys and they're super flavorful, but I think a lot of people are seeing that the sweet and heavy body of hazy, it's super exciting and intense and enjoyable for the first pint, but it's kind of more challenging to sit in a session and have 2, 3, 4 pints of hazy IPAs than, say, a classic West Coast IPA like Dogfish 60 Minute or Stone IPA or, Pliny the Younger. So we're really happy to see, that our West Coast, both regular 60 minute and Imperial 90 minute, the trends are really improving on them. In fact, we introduced 90 minute IPA in a 19.2 can. So that's a big beer in a big can. And that's become our fastest growing package for any of our IPAs.
Wow. Well, Sam, I've got some rapid fire questions for you next. So we want to keep these extra short, but these are the most fun I always have fun with. So these come from our audience, and these are what people really want to know from Sam Calagione. So first of all, I've traveled a bit, and as I go different places, I find that IPA or even NEIPA can be pronounced differently in different places. Have you found, what do you think the right way to pronunciate IPA is?
Well, to your point with the sub-styles, it's funny that and I got to hang out with you in South Africa, but in Europe and different parts of the world, they call it NEIPA, New England IPA, NEIPA. They just say it that way. Whereas I feel like most American breweries call it New England IPA, or I think even more prevalently, the term hazy IPA has been interchanged with New England IPA. I think juicy IPA, sometimes you can get juicy characteristics in a West Coast IPA depending on the way you're adding your hops and what variety of hops you're adding. But I think juicy IPAs is generally associated more with the hazy style as well. So in the same way that there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, there's 1,000 ways to describe an IPA.
Well, speaking of how to describe an IPA, how would you define a truly great IPA? Because there are IPAs and there are IPAs that are really stand out. How would you define it with all the culinary emphasis and experience that you've had?
Yeah, I would say it needs to be a top fermented ale that the sensory experience that's most impressive and leaves the most lasting, contribution to the experience of the beer is the hop profile. And I'd say the best of the IPAs, whether it's a hazy, a West Coast Imperial, are the ones that create a beautiful harmony between the aromatic contributions of the hops and the actual taste and bitterness contributions of the hops. Oftentimes there's some really good IPAs that have massive aromatics and really underdeliver on the taste experience. And conversely, you get many that you don't get a big nose from, but wow, it's got a big lingering bitterness. So I think there's amazing world-class versions of every niche of IPA, from Imperial to Black IPA to Session to Hazy, but I think the world-class examples in any of those categories share a careful balance between aromatic hop contribution and taste hop contribution.
Awesome. Well, Sam, as we wrap up, looking at your release calendar, what have you been working on that particularly gets your heart pumping, that you just can't wait to see what everybody's reaction is going to be in 2024?
Well, the one that's in market that I'm really excited about now, Doug, is the Colderest IPA. And there are other breweries that have done their interpretation of a cold IPA style. But the one that's in the Dogfish variety pack that your viewers can find coast to coast right now is called Colderest. And that's because we're doing some really unique things with it. First of all, we're fermenting it with a lager yeast. So to your earliest point, this is kind of a hybrid between an IPA and a lager. So it's fermented with a lager yeast. It's fermented using white winter wheat. So it's a winter variety of wheat, which again emphasizes the cold concept. But I think most uniquely is we're using these basically fresh hops. So a lot of breweries talk about wet hop IPA, which means right from the farm, they chop the hops down and add them right to the beer. Well, this is essentially a wet hop beer, but the way we use the hops, the hop yards, they harvest the hops wet, and then they don't kiln dry them the way you would with regular whole leaf or pelletized hops. They actually freeze them instead of kiln drying them. So we get these frozen fresh hops, and then we add them during the whirlpool after the boil, but when the beer's still warm. So both the Citra and Azacca hops in Colderest are unkilned, flash frozen hops, which makes a beautiful, intense hoppy aroma, and then a big hop character in the taste, but not a lot of lingering bitterness.
Great. And is there a collab? I mean, you mentioned a collab before we actually started the recording. When I was in North Carolina, you were talking about another collaboration you were working on. What's exciting for 2024 that you're really looking forward to? Do you have a traveling collab or anything that really excites you?
Yeah, there's two that I'm working on right now. There are lots of emails and conversations and good drinking sessions. So last week we had our friends Matt and Sam, the two of the three founders of Other Half Brewery from New York, and they have locations in D.C., New York. They're opening in Chicago, Philadelphia, Brooklyn's where they started. But they're about to celebrate their 10th anniversary, and they were very kind in saying, reaching out to Dogfish and saying, hey, 60-minute IPA was one of our touchstone beers when we were starting Other Half. We'd love to do a collaboration on a new interpretation of 60-minute with you. So they took our best-selling beer, and then we'll be announcing soon that we took one of their most iconic beers, an IPA that has a lot of fruit character from the hops, but we're actually adding wild Maine blueberries to that IPA. So check Dogfish Head and Other Half social channels for more info on that exciting collab. And then further out in the future, I'm working with my friend Teo at Baladain Brewery in Turin, Italy. Every other year in the fall, there's what's probably the most amazing, robust international food symposium called Salone del Gusto in Turin, Italy, affiliated with the slow food movement. And they have this thing called Terra Madre, where there's booths from many countries from around the world, hundreds, where each country's showing off their local herbs and spices and fruits and sugars. So I love going there every 2 years and getting inspiration for ingredient ideas for beer. And we usually do a presentation at Salone del Gusto. And this year in the fall, I'm going to be doing one with Teo, where we'll both be bringing beers from our breweries that are made with vinegar as an ingredient. In our case, actually a wild blueberry vinegar. But then Teo and I are going to do a collaborative Dogfish Baladain beer that will premiere at the Salone del Gusto too. So I'd say the other half one at the front part of the year, which releases next month, and then the Baladain collaboration towards the end of this year too, that I'm really excited about.
I bet you're a kid in a candy store. Italy and all those ingredients.
That place. Yeah, that's probably the most inspiring, marketplace, global marketplace for recipe ideas. Although I was just in Santiago, Chile, about a month ago, and similarly, I got to go to their culinary markets and came home with some great examples of local peaches, white peaches, and local wheat that we're going to be having some fun with for a summer beer in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, at our original brew pub.
Well, I hope to get by your brew pub there in Rehoboth Beach and stay there at the end. As I'm making my plans for 2024, are there any events coming up at either the brewery or at the inn that I ought to try and target would be a good time to come to Rehoboth?
Yeah, I know that you're as much a beer lover as a foodie, Doug. I would go to our website and look up the Weekend of Compelling Ales and Spirits. So we call it WACAAS. And that weekend we plan for all year. And it happens in the spring when the weather gets nicer here. And we set up booths with all different beers, cocktails, foolproof spirits that we make. And next to each booth is a unique culinary dish that a chef from one of our 3 restaurants has come up with specifically to partner with that beverage. So it's the ultimate beer and food pairing event called Weekend of Compelling Ales and Spirits at Dogfish. And you can learn about that and all of our hotel details. We were looking right out the window here. I can almost see our hotel down the canal here in the harbor town of Lewis. Beautiful little 17-room beer-themed hotel. And then we have 3 restaurants here in 2 different towns in coastal Delaware. So it's an awesome destination trip for fellow beer lovers, spirit lovers, and food lovers to come to the home of Dogfish at.
Well, I'll make my plans. That sounds fantastic. Sam, thank you so much for taking time with me, both today and in other times. I know you've got to run and catch a meeting, but thank you so much. This was awesome. Cheers, my friend.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Doug. Thank you to all the viewers out there who support indie American craft breweries. We love being on this journey with you guys.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.